It is late summer, 1942. In faraway headquarters lit by electric lamps and big maps, men draw arrows across paper. In Berlin, the city on the western bank of the Volga is just a name and a symbol. Stalingrad. A line of ink curves down from the Don River, hooks east, and stops at that name. Oil from the Caucasus, the Volga artery, prestige, the will of the Führer. All of it tied to a single word on a map. But maps do not smell of smoke. They do not tremble when shells land. They do not feel cold water soaking through boots. It is September 13th, 1942, just after dawn over Stalingrad. The sun does not rise the way it usually does. It is twisted behind walls of smoke and dust. Its light turned into a dull gray-orange smear across the sky. Wind from the Volga blows in, carrying the smell of cold water, mixed with cordite, burning concrete, and half-charred wood. You are Ivan, a Red Army infantryman just over 20 years old. Quilted jacket, already worn at the elbows, hands shaking not only from the chill of early autumn. The cramped wooden boat is packed with soldiers as it cuts across the Volga. Behind you, on the eastern bank, supply depots and field kitchens. Ahead of you, the western bank, the city that has become a symbol. Mortar rounds and shells from German guns on the high ground crash into the river, throwing up white columns that surge straight upward before collapsing in heavy curtains of water. Every time the boat lurches, your heart jumps into your throat. Somewhere behind you, another boat screams as it takes a direct hit. When you glance back, there is only a brief flower of spray and splinters, then nothing but ripples and debris. An officer behind you shouts over the artillery. Eyes front, no stopping. No one turns back. Stalingrad is in front of you, comrades. On the maps, the German 6th Army is closing its fist around the city. In their orders, this is the culmination of Case Blue, the great summer offensive to seize the Caucasus oil and cut the Soviet Union in half. Take Stalingrad, and the Volga becomes a German river. Cut the Volga, and the Red Army bleeds out. That is the theory, written in neat lines of text. In your boat, theory is just cold water slapping your legs and wood creaking under your feet. When the boat slams into the rocky bank, you jump into the water, icy up to your thighs. Above, Stukas howl, bombs whistle as they fall, houses collapse in heavy waves of sound, glass shatters, someone calls for their mother inside the smoke. An NKVD officer stands on the bank in a long black leather coat, submachine gun slung across his chest, eyes cold and hard. Behind him, a makeshift sign leans crookedly against a mound of rubble, the slogan painted in thick, uneven letters. Not a step back. You and your platoon scramble up a slope littered with broken bricks into the city. The Stalingrad in front of you is no longer rows of factories, parks, and apartment blocks. It is a labyrinth of rubble, stump-like walls, windows blackened by fire, steel frames twisted like the bare ribs of a gigantic beast peeled open and left to bleach. German artillery from the western outskirts keeps up a steady rhythm. Now and then, a barrage of your own Katyusha rockets answers, long white trails slicing across the smoky sky before blooming into distant curtains of flame. The ground under your feet shudders, dust trickling from cracked ceilings, plaster falling like gray snow. Underground, in a low, dim cellar serving as a temporary command post, the war looks different. On a stained map of the city, spread across a table, Red and blue lines tangle around names. Tractor Factory, Red October, Barricadi, Mamayev Kurgan. Little flags mark streets and squares that have changed hands so often, the pins have torn the paper. A weary officer traces a finger along the Volga. They want to cut this artery.
They're surrounded here.
Not sure whether he is speaking to you or himself. If they cut it here, they strangle half the country. Then his finger moves back into the ruins. Your job is simpler. You hold this block, these buildings. You fight for every staircase, every room, every meter of corridor. If they reach the riverbank and stay, we lose more than a city.
The northern pass is heavily fortified.
His words hang in the smoky air like another layer of dust. On your way out of the cellar, you pass civilians who have nowhere left to go. An old woman clutching an empty cloth bag as if it were treasure. A child hugging a charred doll, eyes wide as soldiers file past. No one cries. Tears have been spent already, somewhere back in the weeks of bombing and fire. You avoid the child's gaze, afraid that if you look too long, your legs will refuse to take you back up into the light. As your platoon climbs the broken stairs of a half-burned apartment block, daylight grows brighter, but the air turns thicker with smoke. MG-34 fire from German positions sweeps the facade, punching new holes into the walls. Each bullet feels like a steel needle drilling into stone. You flatten yourself to the floor, feel cement dust cling to your face. Taste its bitterness as it runs down your throat. On the big situation maps, someone will mark this building with a tiny symbol. Write a short note. Held by 62nd Army. For them, it is an icon. For you, it is a place where you might live for the next hour or die in the next minute. In that moment, Stalingrad is not a grand objective or a propaganda slogan. It is staircases you must climb, pitch-black rooms you must retake, corridors you must crawl down with your cheek pressed to the floor. And you understand that from this day on, this city will swallow hours, days, and men, one after another, without slowing down. Type continue to generate the next section. Midday over Stalingrad no longer has shape. The sun is somewhere above the smoke, but collapsed buildings, pillars of dust, and hanging fumes flatten its light until the whole city is trapped in a gray, depthless glow. You, Ivan, are pressed behind a half-destroyed wall, chest heaving, palms sticky with a mix of dust, blood, and sweat. Opposite you, across a narrow street blocked by burned trucks and shell craters, a German infantry unit is dug into the skeletal frame of an old textile factory. From blackened windows, machine guns bark in short bursts. Each burst chews more brick from the facade, sending shards and dust spitting across the cracked asphalt. Over your head, higher on the map, this factory is just another little rectangle in a belt of buildings labeled Industrial Zone. For the German command, it is a stepping stone toward the river and total control of the Volga crossing. For the Soviet command, it is one more tooth in a jagged defensive line clinging to the water's edge. For you, it is a few rooms filled with shadows, splinters, and men waiting to kill you. Your platoon leader gestures. You, a sniper, and 2 grenade men will swing around the flank, drop into a basement, and come up behind the German strongpoint. On paper, the plan is clean and precise. In the rubble, every step is guesswork. You move through an inner courtyard strewn with glass, fallen window frames, and twisted bed frames. Under your boots lie broken pieces of lives, a bent metal spoon, a family photo burned around the edges, a single child's shoe. You force yourself not to look too closely. Each small object is a story the war has snapped in half. To carry all those stories in your mind would be to stop moving altogether. In the basement, darkness closes around you. The air is thick with damp, old coal dust and the sour reek of burned flesh. Gunfire overhead sounds muffled and distant, yet each thud sends a fine rain of grit down from the ceiling. Your own breathing feels too loud, a rasp against the silence between bursts. Near the staircase that leads up behind the factory, you crouch beside a cracked wall and peer through a missing brick. On the other side, you see the backs of German soldiers. They also hug the walls. They also keep their heads low. Their eyes, when they glance sideways, have the same hard shine you see in your comrades' faces. One of them, a young man with a narrow face, pulls a creased photograph from his breast pocket. A woman and a child smile up at him from another world. He looks for only a heartbeat, then shoves the photo back under his tunic. The motion is so familiar, it hurts. You have seen the same gesture in your own unit, in the hands of men who disappeared in the last bombardment. You pull the pin on your grenade. It clinks around a corner. For a fraction of a second, the war holds its breath. Then the blast tears the silence apart, hot dust punching into your face. You surge up the stairs. In your vision, everything slows, pale light slicing through shattered frames, dust boiling in the air, silhouettes turning in surprise, the heavy machine gun still swinging around, someone shouting in a language you do not understand. For a handful of seconds, gunfire rips through the corridor, amplified by concrete walls, until it sounds like the inside of a drum. When the echoes die, you hear your own ragged breath and the lonely roll of a spent cartridge casing tapping along the floor. You secure the room with the machine gun, then a storeroom, then a short length of corridor. Each room is marked with a line of chalk on the wall. On some floors, Soviet troops hold the basement and attic, while German troops cling to the middle levels. In the same building, on the same staircase, two armies share walls and ceilings, separated by only a few planks and a few meters of fear. From above, this is called urban attrition. In your hands, it is a rifle, a grenade, a knife, a door that may or may not explode when you kick it open. Night falls, but the battle does not fully stop. Artillery continues to roll across the sky like distant thunder. Tracer rounds carve faint red lines in the darkness between buildings. Yet, the rhythm slows. Somebody in your platoon snores against a wall for 40 minutes, then wakes up swearing he has slept for days. You sit in a corner of what might once have been an office, back against a blackened safe, arms wrapped around your rifle. Outside, the wind lashes through a shattered window frame, carrying ash and snow, tugging at a curtain that burned halfway through and then stopped, frozen in place. Across the street, in another building, a German soldier also sits on a cold floor with his back to a wall, Car 98K between his knees. His name is Karl, 23, from a small town on the Rhine. Karl sees nothing but dust and broken furniture. In the darkness, he also hears the wind whistling through broken frames, feels dust sticking to his skin, wonders if his eyes will open again tomorrow. Both of you, though you never see each other's faces, are separated not by continents, but by one street and 100 meters of rubble. Type continue to generate the next section. Weeks blur into one another until dates lose their edges. On calendars far behind the front, it is now autumn turning into winter. On the Volga's western bank, where you live meter by meter, it is only before the next attack and after the last one. Stalingrad becomes a gigantic machine for grinding time. The smells of smoke, rust, cold sweat, damp wool, and unwashed bodies weave into a permanent fog. The taste of concrete dust never leaves the back of your throat. Your ears fill with layers of noise, artillery in the distance, the snap of rifles much closer, the stuttering roar of machine guns, shouted orders, curses, the soft animal sounds of wounded men trying not to cry out. After a while, your brain flattens it all into a dull roar, like surf crashing against a rock very far away. You get used to hearing gunfire in the same building as you, used to eating in one room while in the next. On the other side of a thin wall, men speaking another language are doing the exact same thing. Used to the sickening silence right after a blast, when you do not know yet who is still breathing. One morning, you are ordered to crawl through a sewer with a small assault group. Your objective: emerge behind an intersection where German machine guns have pinned down the whole block for days. The sewer water is icy around your knees, carrying debris and things you do not want to identify. The concrete tube smells of rot and sewage and faintly of gas. Above your head, tanks clank across the streets, tracks grinding grit, their weight turning every bolt in the tunnel's joints into a ticking sound. You choke down your fear. If gas floods this tunnel, there is nowhere to go. If a shell collapses the road above, you will be buried with your nose in filthy water. Maps do not show this tunnel. Reports will only say, enemy position cleared. They will not mention the way your fingers prune from the cold, the way your breath echoes in front of your face in small white clouds. When you finally push up through a broken manhole, you find yourself pressed behind a pile of bricks, only a thin wall away from the German machine gun nest. Through the masonry, you hear voices in German, a man complaining about the cold, about the thin soup, about months without proper sleep.
I don't even remember.
Another voice attempts a joke about taking Stalingrad so they can finally go home. The laughter that follows is dry and short. Explosives are placed. The fuse is lit. For a few seconds, time stretches and thins. You can hear individual sounds. A drop of water falling from a shattered roof into a metal bucket somewhere. The tiny click when someone changes magazines on the floor above you. A muffled cough from the position you are about to destroy. The blast blows the wall inward. Heat and dust slam into your face. You rush through the opening, through smoke and drifting plaster. Shapes loom. Weapons swing toward you. Someone yells. For a brief, sharp moment, your world narrows to the arc of your bayonet, the recoil of your rifle, the feel of rough fabric in your grip. When the fight is over, your hands still shake. Not with triumph, but with the strange emptiness that always follows surviving something that should have killed you. Somewhere beyond the river, Soviet commanders look at different maps now. The German advance has stalled in the city. Mamayev Kurgan, the dominating hill, has changed hands so often its soil is churned with bodies and shrapnel. Factories still produce weapons under bombardment. Trains from the east still pour troops and ammunition into the Volga's eastern bank. Stalingrad, meant to be the German spearhead to the Volga, has turned into a trap lined with brick and steel. For the Soviet Union, the city becomes a kind of anchor. As long as it holds, the enemy's 6th Army is tied down, bleeding day after day. You don't see these diagrams. You only see the next doorway. Across the rubble, Karl feels the same grinding pressure from the other side. When he came here in the bright days of summer, his commanders spoke of a swift campaign, a final thrust to the Volga, and then maybe even beyond. The Soviet army was supposed to be broken, retreating, finished. Instead, he finds himself fighting the same men over the same pile of bricks, week after week. Each morning, there are fewer faces in the line. Each evening, someone's kit lies folded on the ground, waiting for a man who will never return to claim it. One day, while moving back to a cellar being used as a dressing station, Karl sees a column of prisoners, Red Army soldiers shivering in thin coats, stumbling through the snow. Among them is a very young man, barely more than a boy, cheeks hollow, uniform hanging off his frame. The boy clutches his helmet like a shield, eyes staring straight ahead. That night, in a corner of a freezing cellar, Karl takes out a letter from his mother. The paper smells faintly of home, or perhaps he only imagines it. In her neat handwriting, she tells him to keep warm, to eat what he can, to stay safe, and not to do anything he will regret after the war. Karl folds the letter and stares at the cracked ceiling. Somewhere above him, arrows are moving on a map he will never see. He wonders whether the men drawing those arrows have ever listened to the way a wounded man breathes in the dark. For you, Ivan, every day you stay alive pushes your old life further away. You still remember fields and rivers, summer evenings, the sound of your father sharpening tools. But those images are thin now, veiled in gray dust and interrupted by the echo of MG-34s. You do not know it yet, but the months you spend here will cut a deep notch into the course of the war. Historians will point to this city as a turning point, a moment when the tide, inch by inch, began to flow back west. You will only know Stalingrad as a place where time broke apart into seconds, each one carrying the weight of your life. Type continue to generate the next section. Winter arrives like a third army, invisible, impartial, merciless. Snow begins to fall on Stalingrad, laying a thin white sheet over rubble, burned tanks, broken lampposts. It is beautiful in a way that feels obscene, a clean surface hiding rust and bone. On November 19th, 1942, you are jolted awake before dawn by artillery. This time, it is not German guns. The roar comes from far to the north and south, rolling in waves. The ground under your back vibrates. Dust trickles from the ceiling. Rumors race down stairwells and through basements. The Red Army has launched a massive counteroffensive north and south of the city. Infantry and tanks have crashed into the flanks of the German armies, holding the line along the Don. For the first time in months, the arrows on the big maps are red and moving outward. You see none of this directly. You only notice patterns change. German shelling becomes less constant. Their attacks grow smaller, probing instead of charging. Sometimes you hear the distant, continuous rumble of fighting far away beyond the city's edge. Days later, the whispers grow teeth. 2 Soviet fronts have punched past Romanian, Italian, and German units on the flanks. and are driving hard behind the 6th Army. Bridges on the Don burn. Crossroads change hands. The hook drawn on the German map in summer is now being cut off by new lines in winter. Inside the city, your world remains a few streets wide, but you feel the pressure shifting. In a rare lull, a political officer unrolls a fresh map and stabs a finger at a thick ring of red that has snapped shut around the Germans. They thought they could trap us against the river.
We finally have control of
voice
Sector 4.
hoarse with triumph and lack of sleep.
We're here.
Now they are in the cauldron. Now they are the ones surrounded. You glance at the map, at the symbolic ring enclosing the 6th Army, and then at your filthy hands, the cracks in your knuckles where blood seeps from the cold. It is hard to put those two realities together. Across the street, in the German positions, Karl feels the encirclement not as a ring on paper, but as a gradual tightening in daily life. Instructions change. They are told to hold, to dig in, to wait for a relief operation coming from the west. The Luftwaffe, they are assured, will supply them from the air. At first, planes do come, silver specks against the gray sky, dropping containers that drift down on white canopies. But the air bridge is fragile. Flak guns and fighters hunt the transport planes. Snow and fog close in. Supplies fall short. Rations shrink. Ammunition must be counted. Karl watches a bread loaf be cut into ever thinner slices. He sees wounded men lying in cellars without morphine, their bandages stained through and frozen stiff. He tries to write letters, but finds fewer and fewer words that feel honest. One freezing day in late January 1943, you are ordered to push forward into a district near the city center. One of the last strongholds the encircled Germans still hold. You brace for another brutal fight. Grenades, room-to-room sweeps, men dying in stairwells. Instead, when you crash through a blown door with your squad, you find enemy soldiers sitting on the floor, backs against bare walls, rifles lying out of reach. Some stand slowly, hands raised. Others do not get up at all. Their eyes are hollow. Their uniforms hang off sharp bones. The gaunt officer who steps forward to surrender looks older than his 20-something years. He moves stiffly, as if every joint hurts. When he raises his hands, they tremble. Gunfire sputters and fades, not just in that building, but along the street, then down the line. In its place rise different sounds. Boots crunching on rubble, the clatter of weapons being stacked, the hacking coughs of men who have been hungry and cold for too long. In one corner, you spot a German soldier wrapping a threadbare blanket around the shoulders of a comrade whose leg is bound in filthy bandages. When he notices you watching, he pauses, eyes flicking to your rifle. For a heartbeat, you stand there, two young men in different uniforms, breathing the same cold air. Then he looks back down and tucks the blanket more tightly around his friend. No words pass between you, but there is an understanding so simple it does not need language. Everything the two of you could do to each other with weapons has already been tried. The rest will be decided somewhere far away by people who have never inhaled cement dust until their lungs burned. On February the 2nd, 1943, the last pockets of organized German resistance in Stalingrad lay down their arms. For the first time in months, the city is quiet enough that you can hear the wind clearly, hear doors banging in empty buildings, hear your own footsteps echo on stairways that no longer belong to anyone. On maps and in communiques, Stalingrad is now a turning point. For the first time, a whole German field army has been destroyed. The myth of invincibility is broken. The Soviet Union, once pushed back to the gates of its cities, is now pushing forward. From this winter onward, for 2 more years, the arrows will slowly creep west. You stand on the bank of the Volga again. The river is choked with ice floes now, grinding against one another with deep, groaning sounds. Behind you, the city is a skeleton of stone and steel. Somewhere under the snow and bricks lie men from both sides, whose names you will never know. You survived. Ivan survived. But you are not the same man who stepped off that first boat. Years from now, if you make it home, you may sit on a worn wooden chair in a quiet village and tell your grandchildren about a stone city on a great river where winter never ended and any room could become your last battlefield. You might mention how important the battle was, how the war changed after it, how generals drew new lines and flags moved across Europe. But when you close your eyes, you will not see arrows or flags. You will see a broken staircase, a basement full of smoke, a hand clutching a photograph, a thin enemy soldier in a corner, tucking a blanket more tightly around his wounded friend. Somewhere in a different country, Karl, if he survives captivity and the long years that follow, may sit in a small kitchen and tell someone about a far-off city where everything fell apart, and where he learned that the enemy's face can look frighteningly like your own. He may speak of hunger, of cold, of the day the firing stopped and the silence felt heavier than any bombardment. History books will call the Battle of Stalingrad a decisive defeat for the Axis, a strategic victory for the Soviet Union, a turning point in World War II. They will list divisions and corps, tonnage of bombs dropped, numbers of prisoners taken. They will mention operations with code names: Blue, Uranus, Winter Storm. Hidden between those numbers are the things that do not fit into tables. The moment a soldier drags a comrade into cover instead of saving himself. The second someone lowers his weapon because the figure in his sights is helping a wounded man. The night 2 enemies sit with their backs to different walls and listen to the same wind. In that sense, Stalingrad is more than a line in a history book. It is a place where thousands of small stories braided together into a rope strong enough to tug the course of the war in a new direction. And for you, for Ivan, for Karl, for all the nameless, you will carry the sound of that city forever. Not the roar of victory speeches, but the whisper of snow falling on broken stone, and the fading echo of footsteps walking away from the gunfire at last.